Hey there, grade 4 teachers. Let's have a look at some ways that you can connect computer science into your Earth Systems unit. Your computer science curriculum has a learning outcome that students examine and apply design processes to meet needs. You can teach your computer science curriculum explicitly, and there are some skills and procedures and knowledge in here that you will definitely have to do that with, but you can also find ways to connect these into your other classroom lessons and daily routines. Students are asked in grade 4 to really look deeply at the design thinking process and what design means. So let's have a look at some ways that you can connect that into your Earth systems. The computer science curriculum, all the way from kindergarten through grade 6, has 3 overarching ideas, one being computational thinking, the next being the design thinking process. Now, this is explicitly stated in the grade 4 curriculum as something that your students are expected to be able to understand and to be able to show that they can implement. Creativity is the third overarching idea, and students have been asked to focus explicitly on creativity in the grades below you. So depending on if you're implementing new or this is the year of implementing the curriculum for everyone, you may have some gaps to bridge with your students. And a lot of those, the grade 2 and 3 curriculum talks about creativity. So you may need to talk about creativity with your students in additional to design thinking. And while computational thinking is not explicitly in your grade 4 curriculum, it is coming up explicitly in the curriculums in the grades the kids will be moving on to, so it doesn't hurt to start working on those processes in grade 4 when you're doing computer science and your other science units as well. In the grade 4 computer science knowledge, they let us know what artifacts can be. And in the skills and procedures, students are expected to design an artifact. So if we look at this list, we can see that an artifact can include anything from an algorithm, which would be the specific coding concept that we may connect to computer sciences. But then in addition to being an algorithm, it can also be a model, a prototype, blueprint, program, experiment, object, and notice it says including, meaning these are just some of the things that could qualify as being an artifact. So really anything that we have the students creating or making or building, whether it be something, a physical model or something that they're creating digitally on the computer, it qualifies as an artifact. So throughout your Earth Systems unit, all of your science units, as well as your other subject areas, if students are creating some type of project, they are doing an artifact and they are in fact working on this skill and procedure from computer science. And just drawing attention to the terminology of artifact is going to make that connection for the students all of the time. And then we want to be bringing the design process in as well anytime students are being asked to create or build something. So you really have lots of opportunities to be hitting these key pieces of the computer science curriculum throughout any types of hands-on projects that your students are doing. Design is the key concept behind your computer science curriculum. The understanding of design involves processes that can transform ideas into artifacts that meet needs. Basically means we can understand that we can be inspired, we can have ideas, and that we can follow processes to turn our ideas into actual things that then we can use to meet needs. So again, this is something that can be very broad and generalized, and it's easy to connect it or draw it into other areas. If you focus on the design process when you're doing your Earth Systems studies with your students, you're just going to be reinforcing not only those computer science concepts around design thinking, but you're also going to use design thinking to help reinforce the Earth Systems concepts for your students. So that's just generally speaking, and the grade 4 computer science curriculum has a lot of allowance is in it, in the way that it's designed and how the skills and procedures are, that you are able to draw those easily into other areas and double up learning, double up that skills practice, and really give your students a solid foundation in design and computational thinking. So as we start to look at some of the specific skills and procedures within the Earth systems organizing idea, we can see that students are going to be looking at Earth's systems in regards to the atmosphere. We're going to be making connections and talking about the interconnectedness of Earth's systems with each other, and explaining how, changes in one system can have impacts on the other system. So when we're talking about connections between things, making connections, we know that that is a key piece in learning, is connecting knowledge. So making connections between things is good critical thinking and problem solving skills, and it ties nicely also into computational thinking. So just taking this learning about the atmospheres and looking at it through the lens of computational thinking, we can see we're going to be working through decomposition on two levels. One, we're breaking the atmosphere, which is one whole thing, down into its component parts of the different spheres. That's one level of decomposition. And as we focus in on each of the individual spheres, we're also going to be breaking them down into their individual components and attributes, and looking for what makes those different spheres what they are. So just making that connection with your students that, gee, look, we can break, there's this thing called the atmosphere, and we can break that down into its parts. Can we break this further down to get, more details? And then moving into pattern recognition, we can ask students to identify patterns in temperature changes, air pressure, and composition across the layers. How are the 4 layers the same? What's different? Are some of them more like each other, or are some of them more different? Can you see, patterns? Can we determine which human activities contribute to changes in Earth's systems? Now we're looking at human activities, and we're going to abstract, because humans have a lot of activities. So we want to abstract and ignore everything that doesn't contribute to some type of impact on our Earth systems. And can we simplify that down to, here are the things that fit this criteria? And simplifying atmospheric processes, which are really complicated processes, breaking those down into simple models is another form of abstraction that we're going to be doing when we're learning about Earth systems. And then finally, algorithm design doesn't necessarily naturally come into these types of science investigations or discussions, but it does make itself readily available, and it's easy to bring that final piece into anything that you are doing. So when you're asking students to just create a set of instructions or rules for, say, interactions between the layers and humans, we could do some simple if-then statements. If a human does this, then the atmosphere is affected in this way. We could also create instructions for how to have little impact on the atmosphere, and ask students to develop a set of instructions for someone to meet that goal of having less impact. And we're talking about Earth systems, we're thinking about these skills and procedures, and we're also thinking about computational thinking and making those computer science connections at the same time. As we're asking students to describe the importance of the amount of sunlight and warmth on a variety of organisms, there's lots going on here, just ways to tie in different pieces of the computer sciences while we're also learning this very scientific structural thing. We can draw in some empathizing anytime you can bring, well, any piece of the design process in, specifically empathizing, because it's a tough skill for some, well, for all kids to learn, or at least to identify and recognize what it is. Some kids, it's really hard to learn to empathy. Children by nature, I would even say especially grade 4, are in a place where they are just actually learning about their own self-identity, and asking them to, think in someone else's shoes is actually quite a stretch for them. So when you have chances to just, what do you think it's like to live somewhere that doesn't get snow? When we're talking about, the amount of sunlight, and maybe we're talking about how different places in the world have different amounts of sunlight than we do. And now we can expand that thinking a little bit to thinking about, I wonder what that would be like. And we're covering the science, and we're also, talking about feelings and putting ourselves in someone else's shoes. Now, when I want to use empathy as a part of the design process, I have those connections to go back to, I remember when we did that in this other project that we were doing. And then, of course, because your computer science curriculum revolves around designing artifacts, and it's not necessarily getting specific to those being computational artifacts, you have license that when you ask students to create a model that shows the Earth's path around the sun, and how the impacts of the warmth on the Earth as we rotate and we go around the sun. If you're asking students to even just draw a picture, they can also be working through the design process, and they are doing that, creating an artifact piece that's one of your computer sciences skills and procedures. So simple way to connect that in anytime students are creating something. If they are showing that what they know about something, there's that opportunity for that artifact design, and the other computers and the other skills and procedures that are within this understanding, where we might be refining it or we might be collaborating. But it's all about, it's that design thinking process about planning, coming up with the idea, creating, testing, evaluating, perhaps going back and refining. So if we have opportunity to do that with a model, talking about sunlight, then that's a great thing to do. Working through computational thinking, again, not explicit to you, but anytime we are breaking down and looking at attributes, we're doing that decomposing. If we're making connections and finding patterns, looking at the simplest, this here is a very simple depiction of the process of time and earth and all of that. And that in itself is an abstraction. So just using that language with the students, saying you're going to create an abstraction, that model that demonstrates temperature changes over a day or a year. And just, using that language is giving them that computer science knowledge as well. Why do different parts of the world have different plants and animals? We can have a conversation. Do you think it has something to do with, again, where we are, how the sun is shining on us? How does where you live on Earth change the types of clothing you wear? We're going to be working empathy. How do you think the stores in Florida have the same kinds of things that we have in January? And then, having conversations about that, or what kinds of plants and animals grow there. All of these pieces, now we can pull this into that algorithm design. Can you write a set of instructions? Can we write some rules? Could you write instructions that a machine could follow to explain this concept, or to show me that you know this? We have some words that I highlighted here in particular. Empathize should be blown up a little bit bigger, I think, than the other things on this slide, because what's highlighted, we're talking basic needs and about demonstrating respect and looking at the perspectives of First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people, which means we're asking students to empathize. So I think we probably mostly think of empathizing as in, putting yourself in another person's shoes. But if we really want to get students to understand what empathizing is, we can also empathize with animals and nature and the environment. So anytime we just pose questions like, how do you think it would feel, or what do you think it would be like, we're working on practicing those empathy skills. Demonstrating respect for water, we're showing empathy towards the water. Why would we want to respect the water? Well, because it's an important part of our environment. And so again, directly not learning empathy, but we're practicing those skills. And as we see these, the First Nations, Métis and Inuit connections come up through almost all of the science curriculums. And this is always an opportunity, again, for us to connect to that empathy piece, to put ourselves in the position of someone else and have open conversations and develop those thinking skills in our students. And we're also, when we're having conversations, discussions, have perfect opportunities to work on defining, ideating, brainstorming. We do lots of brainstorming with students. It's just a matter of making that connection to the design thinking process when we're doing that. And that is a way that you can connect design thinking into the other lessons that you're doing. Again, it's a big concept. The more that you can cover it, the more the students are practicing it in connection with something else, the more likely it is that they're going to have a really good solid grasp on it when they finish grade 4. Asking students to identify something is bringing us into computational thinking for sure. So identifying, grouping, classifying, sorting. We're going to be looking at specific attributes of something, breaking it down into its parts. So here students are being asked to identify plants and animals that exist in various bodies of water. So what are we looking at? Are we looking at animals that don't live in water? No. Okay, so abstract. Get that away. We only need to focus on animals that live in water. What other attributes are we looking at? Well, we need to figure out what kind of water they're living in. And so then we may have, might be starting to sort by salt water and fresh water, and then bringing it down, simplifying it, and getting local with what we're looking at as well, while making connections to areas that maybe students are not familiar with. If we ask students to create a model of a water ecosystem, including all of the animals and plants that live there, they're going to show us that they know, so they're able to identify plants and animals that exist in the chosen body of water that they're representing. They're also going to be creating that artifact that's in the computer sciences curriculum, working on computational thinking as they're thinking about all of the different components that are in their water ecosystem, and then also applying the design process to the whole project in creating that artifact at the end. As students are investigating natural resources found in Alberta and how they are used to meet human needs, I've highlighted needs here again just to make that connection to, if we're talking about needs, we're empathizing. Maybe we think about people who meet their needs in a different way because of where they live or because of other cultural or religious reasons potentially. We're going to bring in the computer science skill and procedure of examining availability and cost of materials during design as we're discussing natural resources, and this piece of how we choose what we use largely has to do with, the availability and cost of materials. So we can make that connection as we're having conversations about natural resources too. We can look at different types of natural resources, looking for patterns amongst them, and we can simplify things down into, these are minerals, and this is, what qualifies as just air. We know that we use oxygen and there's other components in air, but air is a simple enough term. We can abstract that down into its simplest thing, and then we can also make connections between what we're familiar and know with in our own daily lives to beyond and understanding outside of our own personal worlds too. In your earth systems, conservation comes up, the interconnectedness again. So I have my connections icon right in the middle of the slide here. Really, again, all of this loops around in the same way, and just that when we're having conversations, when we're looking at connections, we're working through these different pieces of computational thinking, and we can focus specifically on a piece of the design process that we're working on. We can be asking students to create some type of a project. Even a digital slideshow presentation is an artifact. So that's a computer science outcome. So if students are creating a slideshow presentation about how changes in one system can have impacts on another system, they're showing you this knowledge, this skill from earth systems, but then they're also creating that artifact that's required in the computer sciences. If you go beyond, have students creating an actual program in Scratch. Can you create an animation in Scratch that shows the interconnectedness between human use of parks and conservation practices? And now I'm meeting this earth systems outcome, and also meeting computer sciences, doing an artifact, designing an algorithm, and a number of other ones that are included in the computer sciences, and building those coding skills that don't come up. It's asking students to make an algorithm. It doesn't say it has to be an algorithm for a computer or block coding, but if you get your students doing some block-based coding, using block-based coding programs like Scratch to create projects that demonstrate science outcomes that they're learning in their other units, that you're going to find that your students not only understand their computer science stuff better, it's going to help them understand their other units better too. Asking students to create a plan to implement a conservation practice in a local community. This could be a really big fun project for your class that's going to, again, incorporate in that artifact piece, the computer sciences. So coming up with a plan to this activity would qualify as an artifact in my mind. We could have students complete this activity by working through the design thinking process, and we're going to really meet those computer science outcomes at the same time as this earth systems outcome too. So those are some ways that you can connect computer sciences into your earth systems unit. I hope you enjoyed.